Hello, good evening. It was an insane policy that never made sense. Farmers slapped with a 20% inheritance tax on their farms that Keir Starmer said would help fund the NHS and schools, which of course farmers would use. Well, we all know by now that that wasn't true, because by the Treasury's own estimates, the £1 million tax threshold would only have raised the government around £500 million a year. Enough to fund the NHS, get this, for just one day. So it was never about money, was it? I can take a stab at what the real reason was. At best, being very generous here, this spiteful government simply has it in for the countryside because they know that for the most part, country people don't vote for them. At worst, it could be more sinister. I still don't know what the biggest private landowner in the United States, Bill Gates, was doing in Downing Street the day before the budget last year, the same budget which inflicted this tax raid on farmers. He was there alongside Larry Fink of BlackRock, the CEO of the biggest asset manager in the world, trillions under management. I'll let you make your own minds up on that one. But today, finally, after organised campaigning and spirited protest from farmers and their supporters, the government has caved in.
So we've listened to farmers and businesses across the country, and we want to protect more family farms and businesses. So we're announcing today that we're increasing the inheritance tax threshold for individuals from £1 million to £2.5 million. So that means a couple with an estate worth up to £5 million will pay no inheritance tax when they pass on their estate to the next generation.
Well, Merry Christmas, farmers. As you just heard, the inheritance tax rate has been watered down. The threshold on estates has gone from £1 million to £2.5 million. A small victory that, I guess, while better than nothing, does little to remedy the last 15 months of anxiety, stress and outright fear this government has subjected our farmers to. Some have even killed themselves over it, I'm afraid to say. Not that Keir Starmer seemed particularly bothered by that fact, that some people are fast-tracking their own deaths.
Is the Prime Minister aware that some farmers who have terminal diagnosis now are actively planning to expedite their own deaths so they hit before April? Is he aware of that?
I've had discussions with a number of individuals who've drawn all manner of things to my attention.
Well, thanks for your sympathy, Sir Keir Starmer. John Charlesworth, who was 78, who went by his middle name Philip, he was one of those people who took his own life. He was found dead by his son at their farm in Silkstone in Barnsley in October last year. His son, also called Jonathan, described today's U-turn as the best Christmas present for a lot of farmers. Reform leader Nigel Farage also weighed in.
Well, this government's well known for U-turns, but this is a very welcome U-turn. The raising of the threshold to £2.5 million will make an absolutely enormous difference. Sure, some will argue it needs to be even higher, but it is a massive step in the right direction for small family farms right across the country.
National Farmers Union President Tom Bradshaw also gave his take.
This new threshold will go a long way to securing the future of many family farms. While we recognise that there will still be a tax burden for some of you, this will be significantly reduced, and we hope that it'll go a long way to making your Christmas much happier than it would have been otherwise.
Well, what this U-turn proves is that not only is this Labour government working off the back of a fag packet, but more importantly, the great British public, you at home, still have a voice that the establishment fears. This has been achieved through courageous protest, fierce debate and the kind of British spirit that should never be underestimated. You, me, our families, together, we should never be underestimated. Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private Internet Access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cybercriminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private internet access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today. Well, let's get the thoughts now of my panel. The External Affairs Officer at the Free Speech Union, Connie Shaw, political commentator Jonathan Liss, and the writer and broadcaster Candice Holdsworth. Hello again, panel. Oh, excuse me. Bit of exercise for today. Should we talk about turkeys again? Do you fancy that? No, I'm joking. Jonathan, big screeching U-turn from the government. I guess on one hand you have to applaud them, but as I said just then, on the flip side of it, why subject farmers to this stress, this anxiety, and even some of them, unfortunately, an early death with this stupid policy?
Well, obviously that's horrific to hear about someone who took their own life, and I express my deep condolences to the family. Look, on this particular issue, I don't think this is I can absolutely understand why farmers were very aggrieved about it. I think at the heart of it was a basic case for fairness from the government, because there were people, and these are not the majority of farmers, but there were people who sought to circumvent inheritance tax by buying up agricultural land and then sort of so they could pass it on to their descendants, their kids, etc., tax-free. And I think that was a loophole the government was trying to close. Obviously, I would expect farmers to do lobbying, and what often happens with these things is that the government introduces a policy and then people will express their profound objections and lobby government, and that's right and proper. And if the government hasn't thought through something, or there are unintended consequences such as farmers selling up, then I would expect them to look at that. But the basic principle of it, which is fairness, is not such a bad one. And I think we also should note that most people have to pay inheritance tax after £325,000, and farmers, even before this, were still getting a lot more than that tax-free, and now they're getting up to £5 million if it's a couple. That's
the wider cover. I mean, I could sit here all night, Candice, and bang on about inheritance tax and how much of a disgusting tax it is. I think it's absolutely horrendous, a horrendous tax where the state circles like a vulture after somebody dies and comes and takes whatever they take. Is this politically a win for Labour, or is it a bad look?
I think it's a bad look. I think that it shows, once again, especially after the U-turn on the winter fuel tax, that they're struggling to diagnose the problems correctly, and they're making all the wrong recommendations. You know, these are two things now where they've set the thresholds way too low, caused enormous anxiety and stress. I find it very interesting that Keir Starmer said he was taking this more seriously when he found out that farmers were considering suicide. And you think, but hang on a minute, shouldn't you have researched this before? We all know that farming is something that is deep within your bones. It's something passed down from father to son. You know, if people feel that they have no hope for the future, or the future looks bleak and uncertain, that is going to cause massive unhappiness. And I think we've seen this time and time again. In this time of crisis, they're just not matching up.
Connie, what did you make of Keir Starmer's reaction in that select committee meeting when he was told about a farmer who had killed himself?
I mean...
Are we being a bit harsh on the Prime Minister?
I mean, how are you meant to react to that? Obviously, he should know about these things, and, you know, what was it that made them change their mind? I imagine, like you say, Jonathan, probably lobbying, but not just lobbying, but also it seems as though they needed it explaining to them that you do realise this is going to absolutely decimate many farms. Of course, there may be people who are getting through these loopholes, but surely if that was what you wanted to solve, try and fix the loopholes in a different way rather than punishing and going after all farms. I mean, I don't know, Starmer isn't particularly the most emotional person. You know, it's quite hard to see or understand what he believes in, and so I wasn't surprised, but it was deeply cringing, and you can only imagine what the family thought when they saw that reaction. But obviously, it's like the Sun said, it's turned into a good thing at least. But interestingly, obviously, the Labour government has announced this whilst Parliament's in recess over Christmas, so it can be framed as if it wasn't Christmas.
Why did they do it in the budget?
Well, they didn't want to make it anymore. They didn't. Well, yeah, good point. I guess suppose it would put a bit of a cherry on the cake of a really awful budget, but then it would still add this whole Labour doesn't know what they're doing. But by being at Christmas, it's able to not just, oh, this is a great U-turn. Oh, it's a Christmas present for farmers. Like, they have definitely thought this through to make sure that they announce it at Christmas whilst Parliament's in recess.
I mean, I find it really, I don't know the answer. I just find it very interesting and curious that the budget wasn't too long ago. What's happened between the budget and now for the government to change their mind? I guess backbench MPs are putting more pressure, rural...
I mean, there are a lot of Labour MPs in rural seats, which you didn't used to say, but that is the case now. I think it is quite interesting that the two policies that people... Well, there are three policies that people on this channel, for example, always talk about, which is private school fees, or VAT, and the winter fuel, and this farmer inheritance tax. Now, only one of those, the winter fuel cuts, cut through to the public, and I don't think it has in the same way.
Did you see the protest?
Of course, I've seen the protests. I've seen them I've seen the tractors going outside my house actually, practically, and it's obviously a very, very eye-catching protest. But I don't think it sort of caught the imagination of ordinary people in the same way that winter fuel did. But it is interesting that the government has also U-turned on that. The only one they're definitely not going to U-turn on is the VAT on school fees.
Candice, let me ask you, what was this about, all this inheritance tax raid on farmers? Because as I said in the introduction, it was never about the money. £500 million a year, which funds the NHS for one day. That's despite Keir Starmer coming out and giving a speech about how farmers need to use the NHS and so on. It's in their interest to pay an inheritance tax. So it was never about the money, because that just didn't make sense. What was it about?
Yeah, I do wonder if there is an inherent bias against rural communities and conservative communities. That could be the case. Though, like I said, they've totally miscalculated. And as you two were just saying, they've suddenly realised they've got all these rural MPs who are now under huge pressure from the farming communities. And look at them again. They're up against their backbenchers and they're losing. I do think, though, that a lot of this, though, comes down to extremely poor policy planning in the Treasury. It's the same with the VAT on school fees. They said that money was going to be used to help fund state schools. Now they're saying it's not going to be used for that. And then you look at the farm tax, it's completely backfired and they're not raising the amount they have. So I think it's incredibly poor forecasting in the Treasury as well.
Well, I think that also, to zoom out a bit, what this really comes back to is the government has a lot of revenue to raise to fund the public services that we all deserve, and they did not make it clear at the time of the election how they're going to fund that. They said it was going to come from VAT on school fees and non-DOMs, etc. But obviously, it was always going to be a lot more than that. And because they ruled out so many major tax rises from VAT, income tax, and national insurance, that's led them into all these sort of much smaller tax areas to raise revenue that they need to raise.
22 billion on carbon capture schemes that nobody likes, even Green zealots, the billions on asylum hotels, foreign aid, 14 billion to...
Well, they've slashed foreign aid. They've slashed foreign aid.
Welfare reform, they failed to do that.
You want to raise £500 million, which, in the grand scheme of things, isn't a lot. I mean, I'll give my advice for free, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. So there's plenty you can go for. Connie, do you think the government's been spiteful with this policy? And do you agree it was never about money?
Well, it clearly couldn't have been about money, because surely someone in the Treasury would have pointed this out, that only one, this is only going to fund the NHS for one day.
Yeah.
But it couldn't have been spiteful, because why would they're not going to vote for us anyway. I mean, when you're saying, John, if it doesn't cut through to the public, I think that people do forget that the majority of the UK isn't big cities, and just, I'm from a rural area in the southeast, and there are lots of farmers around there, and just because the majority of people aren't farmers doesn't mean they don't understand this issue. And even though lots of them are working class areas, they're probably not likely to vote for Labour. But it's hard to say. Honestly, I don't know. I think I agree with Candice. It's just clearly they don't seem to know what they stand for, and it's very easy to just get in a mess when you're going through all of these holes to try and you talk about, John, all these specific policies that people on this channel like to talk about, because I think it's a general thing of wanting to hold on to individual rights, whether that's what you earn or just your ability to not be controlled by the state. And this government is extremely authoritarian. There's no debate about that. That is so clear.
And I guess, Jonathan, I mean, it's indicative that you mentioned the issues that this channel likes to cover, but there is a reason, and I don't want to be self-congratulatory here, but we are now the UK's #1 news channel and have been for for many months running. So clearly we're doing something that other broadcasters aren't doing and focusing on issues. I mean, we've been going hell to leather on the farmers, for example.
And people are entitled to talk about whatever they want to talk about. I'm just saying that of those three issues I identified, the only one I think that had broad cut through and that really made the government unpopular was the winter fuel. I don't think, and I'm sorry, but I don't think that the majority of people in this country cared that much about the private school VAT fees.